Hello, and welcome to Traverse. My name is Franziska Eri. I'm a theatre and opera director talking to you from the RAM Theatre in Budapest, Hungary. Every week I'll be talking to different industry professionals from all over the world about their careers, the shifts and adjustments they had to make during this pandemic, and their hopes and dreams for the future. This is Traverse. What's next for our industry?
Today's guest is Welsh director Adele Thomas. Adele was raised in Port Talbot and began her directing career while a student at Cambridge University. She has directed in venues such as Shakespeare's Globe, the Royal Court, the Royal Opera House, and Northern Ireland Opera. She is also one of the founding members of Freelancers Make Theatre Work, a UK initiative which launched during the pandemic to highlight the rights, issues, and importance of freelancers in the entertainment industry.
Hi Adele, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm really great, thank you. How are you?
I'm good too. Where are you at the moment?
I'm in Cardiff, I'm in sunny Cardiff. It's very hopeful, spring's on the way, so we can see the daffodils, and I'm in my office, in my house, which I've never spent so much time in my entire life. I feel like I've spent more time in this office in the last 12 months than I have in the entire 10 years I've lived in this house.
That is very familiar.
Yeah, absolutely. And you were actually in the theatre, so I'm profoundly jealous.
I am. I'm in Budapest in the RAM Theatre, and it's actually a bit insane, like how weird it is to be in a theatre, because obviously it's dark and nothing is going on here. So I feel like I'm just having my little own Phantom of the Opera moment.
There's nothing like being in a theatre when it's empty. I mean, it's just one of the greatest privileges of being a director is that moment where you get to go in before tech and it's incredible, it's quiet and it's empty, and you really get the sense that this is a building that's a blank canvas for just endless possibility, and it feels really potent, and I just love sitting in the theatre. I wish I could be there now.
I wish you could be here too. Let's start with the very personal. How has 2020 been for you as a maker, as a person?
Oh, well, I mean, in a weird way, they're two kind of different things, aren't they? As a maker, 2020 was, it was different, to say the least. So I was in the middle of making a show when the pandemic kind of became a reality, in the world that I live in Cardiff. And actually, weirdly, I never make shows in Wales. I so rarely work in Wales. And it was the first time, probably in about 7 or 8 years, that I was making a show in Wales and we got closed down. So I think there's some sort of universe. I think maybe I caused this and I'm so sorry. But we were, there was this kind of wild psychedelic musical, and it had been quite a kind of full-on process. You really kind of, when you hear all those legendary stories of people making musical theatre and how much input it's needed from so many people, it was such a massive endeavour, and there was a big cast, and we had a visual artist who made about 2 hours worth of psychedelic animation. It was fantastic, and this amazing costume maker who'd made these unbelievable pieces of moving art in the costume, and there were about 200 costumes and like hours of film and a band and DJing and people roller skated, and then it was our first day of tech rehearsal. We would drive, the show was going to be in a miners' welfare hall in the middle of the valley, so it's right in the middle of the countryside, middle of nowhere. I was in the car with my choreographer and associate director, and it was the first time that we thought, I've got a feeling that we probably aren't going to do our full run.
Wow.
We were okay. Maybe we'll do like a week, or we'll do maybe a week and a half. And we arrived at the venue, and already the news is starting to come in on the radio and on Twitter. So we went to a cafe. Can you imagine? and we were saying, we're going, okay, well maybe we'll do the first weekend, and then we got in the venue and the fit up had happened and the band was sound checking, and they were just setting up the last of the video, and it was looking amazing. Finally, this kind of crazy thing was clicking into place after all of this uphill kind of moving mountains to get it ready to be performed. And then by lunchtime, we were kind of thinking, okay, well, maybe what we'll do is we'll get our first 2 performances and then we'll shut the end of the weekend. And when we came back from lunch, it was like, okay, well, maybe we'll do 1 performance. And then by the dinner break, the artistic director arrived. And it was his first day as artistic director of the National Theatre Wales as well.
Oh, no.
He arrived in Cardiff that morning for the first time, and his first job was to come and close us. And he arrived at the venue and we had a chat, and so by 5 o'clock then we were shut before we'd even teched.
It's almost like it was a storm coming and you're just, it's coming closer and closer. And also when you're rehearsing, I feel like I don't know if you feel this way, but I feel always like so separate from the rest of the world. So it's very hard for information to come into that bubble. And you guys almost invaded your production.
Totally, absolutely. And I think you're exactly right, because when you do go into rehearsal for a show, it's like the world disappears, doesn't it? Genuinely felt like a cloud had come from London and just moved across the country and kind of just took everything out in its path. It was absolutely extraordinary. I remember waking up and on my street there were builders working on a house down the road, and the hairdressers opposite were still going, and the shop was open, and I just remember being so angry. I was like, why have we've just had to damn tools, and this is ridiculous. And at the time I think we were kind of thinking, okay, well, we'll be shut for a week. But that's now ruined, that means everyone will be going off to other jobs. So even though we're only shut for a week, it's ruined the show and we can't ever get it back up and running. And of course, we never expected that we'd be here a year later.
Here we are. And will it ever get performed? Will you get it in front of an audience?
Genuinely don't know at this point in time. I mean, I think there's a will to do it, but it's quite a big project and it'll take a massive commitment from National Theatre Wales to get it back up and running, I think. But let's see. I mean, I think there is a will to see it. I mean, I have a feeling that everyone I've spoken to will say the same thing, but it's the sort of show that would actually be really great to kind of come out of lockdown too, because it was a big old party. There's no coincidence that all of the fashion magazines are saying that the fashion trends of next year are going to be the 1920s. We're about to hit peak hedonism. I think when we come out, and God, we deserve it.
Oh yes, I'm very much looking forward. I think I tweeted it today that I'm just waiting for us to go to the park and have drinks and just yell at each other, "You're on mute, you're on mute."
I can't wait to wear some clothes in the bottom half of my body. I've been naked from the waist down for the last 12 months.
So actually, before we move on, because you've had quite a year, and we will get to it, this production, was there ever a plan? I mean, it happened so fast and you had to think so quickly, but was there ever a plan to actually digitalize it and try to bring it to an audience that way?
That's the great sadness, actually. And the lighting designer, Joe Fletcher, is an amazing lighting designer. He was really passionate on the day that we were shutting down. I mean, to the point where he was staging a one-man coup, to go, no, we should stay in tech and we need to finish this and we need to film it. I mean, I'm such a kind of analog queen. I can barely turn my phone on. So, so I was like, yeah, video is really, yes. So he really fought, and we really fought for that, but it just wasn't possible. I mean, people didn't have a clue what was going on, and because Boris Johnson hadn't definitively said one way or another whether theatres should close or whether he was ordaining that they should shut, because it was so speculative. I mean, if we can't do it as a full show, then I'd like to think that now I've become Zoom savvy enough, or kind of tech savvy enough to maybe do a version that's digital, or even audio might be quite fun. Some sort of crazy concept album might be quite quite a fun thing to do. You
mentioned guidance, and I wanted to talk a little bit about Freelancers Make Theatre Work, because that was a big anchor for many of us. And would you mind just talking about it as if no one knew what it was?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. Well, to the people 50 years in the future, we're like, freelancers, what? People work in the arts? We have robots now. We don't need arts workers. We were following the news and following the stories that were coming out in media, and the narrative was almost entirely dominated. I mean, the narrative was dominated and was entirely consistent of people who ran massive organisations saying that buildings were in trouble, which was, I guess, to be completely blunt, 2 months into the pandemic, it was actually quite a grating experience personally, because first of all, the narrative was very woe is me, which I think doesn't play very well to a mass public who are already quite suspicious of the arts. In the UK, I think theatre, basically there's a PR problem with theatre in the UK, which is partly due to the kind of cliched image of, lovies who sit around on their sofa waiting for the phone to ring and, swanning about and remembering the days when they were in something with Judi Dench. Which of course is not true. Arts workers work incredibly hard, and freelance arts workers are the bulk of the industry for starters, but also they consist of a massive array of extraordinary skills and talents, from cobblers to opera singers and carpenters and actors and playwrights. I mean, these incredible people whose pure vision and artistry and ability to work for less money than they probably should be getting paid means that the industry is one of the world's kind of leading industries, and it's one of the biggest kind of providers of GVA to the UK economy, quite frankly, which is not an argument I thought I'd be making passionately, but here we are. Yeah, it was frustrating that there was a kind of sense of, we're all gonna collapse by Christmas. And even I started getting to the point where I was like, well, maybe you should. If all you could do is moan, then maybe you should collapse. But then, so there's a kind of, increasing sense of impotence, I guess, as a freelancer. You're sat at home kind of watching people going, no, don't say that. Come on, you've got to fight for us. You've got to fight for us. And then eventually it got to the point where I thought, well, actually, they're not going to fight for us. We have to fight for ourselves. So I kind of sent, in just rage, I did the thing that everyone who feels impotent and is full of rage does, and I went on Twitter. And I kind of put a series of tweets out going, here are just some thoughts about how we can move this forward. And on the basis of that, I got quite a lot of attention, and a lot of people got in touch and said, well, we need to start talking about freelancers. So at the same time, Vicky Mortimer, who's an opera and theatre designer, amazing opera and theatre designer, she'd gone to Rufus Norris at the National and said, you're not talking about freelancers, we need to do something. So he then was talking to the Consortium of London Theatres, which are the artistic directors of about 13 theatres in London. They decided that individually they would gather groups of freelancers, and then out of those groups, one person would go forward to a kind of Avengers Assemble type group. And you can tell that I've actually had the time to start watching some Marvel films in lockdown. So then I went to the Lyric Hammersmiths group, because Rachel O'Riordan had been an artistic director in Cardiff, and she said, come and talk. We shared what our kind of concerns were and what we needed and what as freelancers we wanted to kind of start lobbying for. And then I went to this group, which at the time was called the National Theatre Freelancers. Basically, there were about maybe 15 of us, and I think pretty much everybody is still part of what became Freelancers Make Theatre Work. There's a fantastic writer called Tino who was at the first group, and I think very quickly she kind of ended up having this brilliant rant where she said, if we simply replicate the hierarchical structure that we are trying to challenge, then we are basically just kind of continuing the same injustice. And so that was an amazing call to kind of to do something and to just think about how we could function differently. So what it is it's a kind of advocacy group for freelancers. Freelance theatre workers is the kind of title. So creative and technical freelancers who work in the theatre industry. The first job was really to make freelancers visible, because there was very little data. This is now we can forget this, but there's so little data on the freelance workforce, which is partly why the government's response has been so, on one hand it's been great with SICE, but then on the other hand it's been bad with leaving out a third of freelance workers in the UK, because there just isn't the data on the workforce. So the first action was visibility, and so we ran a photo campaign where we asked everybody to hold a sign up saying freelance and then their job title. So we were doing some really long shifts in the first few days. I think we didn't sleep for about a week when we launched this campaign. It was so incredible. And we had no idea if one person would take part or 5 people. And me and Tom Piper, who's a designer, who's also a member, we were manning Twitter the day that campaign started. And it was unbelievably moving. Thousands of images were pouring in from people who, with these unbelievable, all this skill and all this talent, and all of these people who had had no voice for, up at that point, probably 4 months of pandemic, and sat at home and had nowhere no centralized place to kind of to make themselves known and heard.
Yeah, I remember giving my phone to my mom and I was like, I'm doing a sign, where should I stand? We took like 20 photos. It's like, oh, this is going to go out and everyone's going to see it, and I'm here and I'm a freelancer. And it really felt like you guys brought a whole community together, which is something that I think was absolutely needed.
Absolutely. And so, yeah, our work from visibility, we then kind of went on to lobby. So we've obviously campaigned endlessly for the extension of what support there is, and to back things like campaigns like Excluded UK, who are looking to kind of campaign for people being left out of government support. And now we've kind of evolved in more of a lobbying group. So recently we have had some contact with HM Treasury, which has been really great, I have to say. The civil servants that we're talking to have been really eager to know how to help. I mean, you said earlier on, as a kind of maker and as a person, I think without Freelancers Make Theatre Work, I think this year, like last year, would have been unbearable. But actually, it was amazing to unleash a kind of part of myself that I'd never really been able to explore, which is the bit that is interested in campaigning and advocacy and people.
But where is it going next? You mentioned it's now turning into more a lobbying group. Because I don't know if you felt this way, but I think this was a conversation that we should have had a long time ago, and maybe this time really forced us to stop and take stock and realize that actually freelancers are very vulnerable. So where do you think, even after Corona, where do you think it will go next?
So just before Christmas, we started a campaign called Future Labs. They were, I say campaign, it's more like a little project. We got some Arts Council funding to pay freelancers to be in a room with artistic directors, to create a neutral space where people could, well, the idea was we called it Future Labs because it would be like a scientific model whereby you come with a hypothesis rather than with a problem. We feel that, we can support emerging artists better now than we ever could do. Solve that, prove that. I think probably what will become our next big new branch of work, which is to kind of start re-envisioning and remodelling the future of how of greater equity between freelancers and organisations. I had an amazing conversation yesterday with Maria Arberg, the theatre director, and we were talking about, how the industry might change. And she said, we keep saying the industry, and we've got to remember that we are the industry. Freelancers are the industry. We just need to make sure that we hold on to that. There is a kind of worry that the pandemic or the recovery from the pandemic will mean that organisations will be going to freelancers and saying, we're financially a bit hobbled. Can you take less pay? Can we, maybe if we stream this digitally and we don't give you any residuals? There's still a worry that there are old, now very outdated force majeure cancellation clauses, which mean that in the result of the pandemic happening again, there's no protection for freelancers.
You touched upon something that actually was wondering about, and I don't know if you have the answer to this, so it's okay if you don't. But I've been thinking a lot about the way our forum is changing, and you mentioned Zoom, and you mentioned online and digital. I still don't really know the legal ins and outs about work being produced or even shown, like archived work being shown online, and who actually gets to profit from it. Is there any conversation around that?
I think it's often quite simple. Do you know what I mean? But there are things like, inequality, gender and racial and trans inequality within the art form. There are issues with, like I said, pay scales quite often, especially in theatre. I mean, there was an amazing report by Stage Directors UK a few years ago, which outlined how terrible pay is for I wouldn't want to break it down as a hierarchical as this, but for the lead creatives and leading organisations in the UK, getting paid, student fees for making work is just extraordinary. And one of the things that I think inevitably will need to be addressed is the rights and residuals and royalties that come from streaming. I'm really impressed. There's a whole kind of world of younger artists than me in my aged form who are really kind of publicly campaigning for streaming to be kind of paid, that you have to pay for it. And I think that it's brilliant because my boyfriend's a musician, And one of the things that's been happening alongside, particularly like government talks about Brexit, is that there have been a lot of select committees at government about just that, Spotify and YouTube and streaming rights and payment for musicians. Because, the thing that is happening in the music industry is that the record companies are raking in loads of cash and none of it's going to the artists. And we face being in exactly the same position in the theatre and opera industries if we don't set out from the start equitable and fair streaming payment systems. So you're right. I mean, there were so many organisations that that rang up their artists and say, we're going to stream this show because we have no money and we need to make it back. And then the artists are kind of like, yeah, but I have no money and I'm not going to get paid for this. Yeah. So we have to address that. I mean, just full stop, we have to address that now.
You touched on Brexit, and I was wondering if Freelancers Make Theatre Work is international, or is there any talk about it becoming international?
That's a very good point. And it's not a conversation we've had yet. I mean, what I love about Freelancers Make Theatre Work is that we've done so much. Our ambition is absolutely bigger than the capacity we have at the moment. And I do think when we've got someone who can produce us a bit, then we'll be in a much better position to think about that. But Brexit is it's such a huge issue. And the problem is not going to be for established artists. The problem is going to be for the next generation of singers and creatives and technicians, who won't have the same opportunity to just fly around Europe and travel and meet people and grow your craft in the way that previous generations would have. And fundamentally, that's really the problem with Brexit as a whole, isn't it? That it was voted for by a generation who had all this opportunity and have kind of taken it away from the next generation. I keep trying to find the analogy for that you can translate to a kind of government that are obsessed with, or supposedly obsessed with, business, which is that this is an innovation-driven industry. So it's the arts are dependent on lots of people innovating and experimenting and throwing stuff against the wall and seeing what happens. And if we don't have the opportunity to do that, then it will die. We are facing a problem whereby suddenly we're going to say, oh, well, why don't we have any young opera singers anymore? Well, because none of them got to go to those opera houses in Europe and, pit themselves against the rest of the world and evolve. We stayed here.
You are originally a theatre director and you moved into opera, and I wanted to ask you about how this year has been, because you've done fabulous things, one of them being a project at the Royal Opera House.
So so the way I see myself is I'm an opera director who was forced to do theatre. I nearly got to do opera because I do think I was living a lie. I was always an opera director the whole time. It was very late in the day coming to theatre because I just come from a background where that isn't a thing, really. Weirdly, I come from a town called Port Talbot in South Wales, which is a very industrial steel town. Now, Port Talbot's got an international reputation as an exporter of steel and also of Hollywood actors, weirdly, because we've got this amazing gamut. Richard Burton and Anthony Hopkins and latterly Michael Sheen are all from Port Talbot. It's so strange. It's a tiny little place, But when you go there, you realise, because there's a kind of inherent drama in the day-to-day life of being in Port Talbot. You can become an actor in Port Talbot, but the idea of becoming a director was absolutely not on the cards, So I did, when I was young, I used to do a lot of youth theatre and stuff. But what I used to spend most of my time doing was putting on the Immaculate Collection, Madonna album, and staging it, and being obsessed with listening to music. I mean, I was always obsessed with music. For some reason, we had cable in our house growing up, which I don't know how that got there. And I had MTV, and MTV would be on 24 hours a day, and the videos were I was just obsessed with them. I loved the kind of blend of incredibly modern fashion and high art and low art, and it was pop, and also, you know, you'd get these splashes of Caravaggio. I mean, music videos in the kind of 80s and 90s were just, you know, amazing, so innovative and so extraordinary. So I kind of, you know, I knew I didn't want to be an actor, but and then that was it. That was my kind of option as far as I knew at the time. And when I went to university, it was really late in the day that I finally realised, oh, hang on, you can kind of bring together, I'm obsessed with art and obsessed with live performance, but not really knowing how to put it all together. And so then eventually I kind of ended up making plays. But I really knew that this was the job for me when I saw Richard Jones's Fotsec and the WNO. And it was, it just, you know, completely changed my life. Everything about it was, I would never realised that, you know, theatre could, or live performance could look like that, you know, that everything I'd seen. I mean, I'd seen some brilliant stuff. I'd seen some amazing Katie Mitchell stuff, you know, I'd seen some court, but it wasn't, that was not chiming with my life. It's like, it looked like it was a whole different universe. And in my life, all my mates were in rock bands, and we were into the 60s. We used to all dress in 60s clothes all the time. And, you know, we were obsessed with pop art and joy and going out. And I felt like that wasn't being represented in any of that work. You know, that felt very beautiful and classy. And actually, I wanted something trashy. I would never say this to Richard. But then suddenly you see this work and it's like, you know, master artists. So then it made me much bolder about realising that actually you can't, you know, the point of making art is not to copy what someone else has done. You have to reach into your into the weirdest, most idiosyncratic parts of yourself and kind of drag that up and and work with that. But then it took me like 15 years to get into opera. You know, I just could not get my foot in the door anywhere at all. Wow. And I think partly that, I mean, I don't think this. I know that this is to do with being, you know, in your 20s and turning up with a strong Port Talbot accent and not having the kind of shine or the kind of polish of, you know, other people who might come from slightly more privileged backgrounds. So I just thought, well, I'm writing this off. Then it took us a long time. I worked with a designer a lot called Hannah Clark, and we just one day we ended up going, oh, we just have to make opera. Like whatever we're making, we'll just treat it like it's opera. So we just did that. We just, you know, approached every play and just gave it an operatic kind of level of design and treatment. And finally, one day, Oliver Mears, who's now the AD of the Royal Opera House, came to see a show, and he gave me my first opera, and I was born.
Finally, we've all been waiting for it.
Absolutely. Exactly. So I went to Northern Ireland when he ran that company, and it was just, I mean, the cast were incredible. It was, and I just can't tell, I mean, it was like suddenly everything in the world makes sense, you know, for the first time. To walk in that room and have the pianoforte and to just be with that music. And I remember the first day going, oh my God, what? I have no idea what I'm doing. I mean, never done this before. And I'm literally walking in cold, and I've never assisted anybody. Like I'm the world's worst assistant director, so I'm pretty much like, oh, I can't sit here doing that. I'm very hyperactive, so you know, assisting is disastrous. So I just turned up and went, oh my God, I've just, you know, it's that thing when you walk through the door and you realise, I don't know what the hell I'm about to do. I've got no idea, you know. And actually, it just completely made sense. And there's something about being with music all day long that is, it's just completely changed my DNA. And then we did a Kazee, and then Ollie went to the Opera House, and I kind of thought, well, I'll never see him again. And thankfully that wasn't true, and he gave me a show. I did a Handel called Berenice at the Limbury, and that was an absolute joy. Actually, just before lockdown, we found out that I'd been nominated for the Olivier, which was really amazing for a Handel that no one had ever wanted to do. Considered to be an absolute dumpster fire of an opera. We were pretty chuffed with that. So yeah, and then like you said, I was very lucky that I got a phone call from Oliver in the summer to say that he was thinking of putting together a programme of small pared back pieces. And he asked me if I wanted to be part of that, and I was like, yes, because at this point I, you know, had no contact with other human beings, let alone being able to make something. And I was just, you know, incredibly honoured, because the other directors involved were Deborah Warner and Richard Jones and Anthony MacDonald, you know, three little upstarts starting out in their career, and just three of the biggest people in the world, you know, three of my biggest heroes. So that was kind of amazing.
Just on Apollo and Daphne, this was peak pandemic. I know, because I was in the same building as you, or we literally were a couple of days. We missed each other by a couple of days, and I don't know about you, but for me, it was so strange to work in a building during the pandemic. It was just like a ghost town almost. Could you tell us a little bit about what it was like to actually rehearse?
Yes, it was gorgeous, and it was weird. So it was lovely to be doing it. I think the weirdest thing was, I'm very used to, like, I think you can probably see this on Zoom, I'm using my hands all the time, and I'm quite kind of like smileys. As a director, the feedback I usually get from the cast is that they always can hear me laughing. Or if I'm in the audience, they know I'm there because they can hear me laughing on the top of my voice. And that was the weird thing about having a mask on all day, was that you're kind of sat there and suddenly you don't have what is a really big tool in my directing arsenal, you know. So it's the first time that the singers, I think, that you couldn't kind of have that relationship with them, if that makes sense, because they're looking out at a kind of panel, you know, from repetitor and assistant conductor and me and choreographer and associate director and stage management. There's like nearly 8 people or something were sat in masks. And so I think inevitably there's a kind of, there was a slight, they were really lovely, but there was a slight air of fear, if that makes sense, because of course they're looking at this strange thing. And I think if we hadn't been masked, I think it would have been very different. I think it would have been much more relaxed. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's very tense, that kind of, it's like auditioning in front of a panel or something.
Right, exactly, yeah. And then, but also you get nothing back, because even if I'm smiling my face off, you can't see it. So you've just got people who are like, you know, just see that, which is really weird. I think there was constant cognitive dissonance, right? Where you're kind of going, you're so happy to be in rehearsal that you are happy with being in the room, and then maybe you go home at night and you go, should we be rehearsing? which was a constant kind of internal battle. But I think we were as safe as I think we could have been at that point. And the thing that I think we will forget now is that it felt like this was going to end. You know, it felt like we were kind of coming out of something. That's what was so lovely about it, that you were kind of willing to take the risk, because actually, well, that's okay, because this is the final hurdle, and then it'll be Christmas, and then we'll be all back to work as normal. And I don't think people were expecting this year to start, and for, you know, the industry to kind of have to wind back down again.
Yeah, and it is very exhausting, as you said, on organizations, but specifically, I think, freelancers, because, well, presumably you probably have your next 5 years planned, don't you, as someone who works in opera?
Oh, I mean, that's the heartbreaking thing. So last year, when the show we were doing shut down, and then the rest of the projects for the year were gone, I think I could get my head around that and be quite disciplined about going, there was a global pandemic, this has happened, and that's that. Then, but what I do think I did last year was I kind of focused entirely on this year. So March would have been my first show this year. And then all the way through to 2023, I was kind of like, everything was laid out perfectly. And you will know as a director that happens so rarely. So I was absolutely delighted that for the first time in my life, you know, I've got 4 years planned, and it's absolutely all fits together, and I can have a holiday there, and I can go and do this here, and this can happen, and my life is all going to be brilliant. And of course, Christmas happened, and it felt like something happened on New Year's Day, where suddenly it was like everyone's fortunes were completely turned around. So show in March is gone to who knows where. I've luckily still got 2 shows in the diary this year, which one of them's not in the UK, so I'm pinning my hopes on that happening. And then, but all of my work next year is gone, because of course everything gets shunted around with the reprogramming. So that's weird, because then suddenly it's, this is something that, FMTW have been trying to talk to Treasury about, is that the impact of this is not going to stop on June the 21st, when we were allowed in buildings. Actually, there are huge knock-on effects for organisations who are then moving people around. And, the industry is going to come back in a diminished form. So even if people are making shows in June, July, August, September, October, December, even into next year, they're not going to be making big shows with massive casts and teams of people. They're going to want to be making shows that can recoup financially. So they're going to be small, they're going to be established artists, there'll be no room for emerging artists, unless the industry really takes it upon itself to kind of make huge sacrifices to support people. So that's a bit scary.
It is scary, and I think what you said about painting a picture of what programming will look like, not just in the UK, but I think all over the world, is actually quite depressing, because I think it is quite homogenous, isn't it? One-man shows or two-man shows, probably men shows, probably not really exciting work, and probably not a lot of sets and costumes as well, considering that we might have to carry on with this socially distancing thing. Do you think there is any sort of future in our industry, or anything that we are actually learning from this time that is a good change for us?
I think, Black Lives Matter was unavoidable. And that was kind of amazing, because, we all had to stop and look at it, really look at it, look at the kind of situation, look at the injustice. So I think that it'll take time, but I think that it will have a massive impact. I do think that things will get better for freelancers. And I think, again, these things are usually slow, but I think just the fact that we know each other now, and we've seen each other, and we know our force, and we know what we mean to the industry, and we know what we can do, I think that it's inevitable that we can't put that back in a box. So I think that's really exciting. I think the problem that we've had, I can't really speak to opera about this, it's more of a theatre issue, I think, but maybe I'm wrong. But I think what the arts have become guilty of is that they've become very complacent about focusing their attention on the same audience. So it doesn't matter whether you're in Cardiff or Edinburgh or Blaenau Ffestiniog or Manchester, it's like all theatre is being made for the same audience. And to the point where you could probably take the programme of almost any theatre in the UK, with very few exceptions, and put it on any other theatre, and you really wouldn't be able to tell the difference. So what I really love is for artistic directors to kind of have that moment now to go, what do I really want to do? What is my vision? How can we make something? How can this building be totally different to any other organisation? That to me feels like that's the point of being an artistic director, right? Surely. So, and if we can do that, then I think there will be such a kind of birth of vision across the country, and that's really what we need now, I think. You're right about the one-man shows, and I really wonder how well those one-man shows that were put on by kind of big stars did, because I've got a feeling that it probably didn't do as well financially as they would have thought, is my hunch.
There's a lot of skepticism about specifically work that's actually made about COVID, I think.
I never want to watch a play about COVID. If you were writing an opera about COVID, please do not consider sending it to me. I think what I really want is, I want to make a show where everybody's just like, lubed up and kind of jumping on top of each other.
Yeah, just orgies non-stop, that's going to be...
It's like a huge non-stop Caligula orgy now for the next 4 years, and that's it. I don't care what the opera is.
You mentioned that you are an analog queen, which, by the way, I think you should put on your Twitter. That's brilliant. Just analog queen. Yeah. How much of that was a hindrance, you feel, when it became so digital? Because you hear these solutions from different opera houses of like, oh, if you can't travel in, or if you can't get a test, we might be able to virtually get you there. There might be more and more digitalization, and I was wondering what your thoughts were on that.
the show I was supposed to do in March was Ballad by Vivaldi, which is a co-production between the Royal Opera House and the Irish National Opera. And basically I kind of just got a direct designer on board. So we designed the entire thing on Zoom together, never met each other in person, which is kind of, unfathomable, but we did it, right? And actually really pleased with the design we came up with. And, that was really amazing. And in a way, I think it gave us more time because Molly was in Ireland and then she's in Sweden for a bit working. And actually what it meant was we could be together for 6 hours and just dream and play and look at things. And maybe actually if we'd been in the world together, our time would have been much tighter, and you would have had to go, well, I need to go to another meeting, I need to be off and doing this, or I can't come see you, or I won't see you for another month. So that was kind of brilliant. And then Il Trovatore similarly came in quite late in the day, and Anne-Marie Woods, who's designing that, we met once. We managed to kind of have a 2-hour meeting at her house in which we kind of got the whole concept. Weirdly, it just all came together in over that 2 hours, and then we've done the rest of it all on Zoom, which is mad. I mean, the fear is I'll get to see the set in the space and go, wait a minute, it has 3 dimensions, I've not even thought about this. But living in Cardiff, I can imagine that this is going to be brilliant, and I hope that it will encourage a lot more artists to move out of London and go and, live across the country and go and, finally you can go and live in the Lake District, and it's fine because you can have Zoom meetings now. You don't have to be, in London the whole time, and I really hope that gives people, slightly better quality of life than you can get in a one-bedroom flat in London. And hopefully it'll mean that the whole of the UK suddenly has this proliferation of artists, brilliant minds and amazing people kind of living all over the place. Would be really thrilling.
All our London listeners are right now like, what? How dare you? I am so excited to listen to you, because it sounds like it was, with all its difficulties, you somehow managed to carry on working, you somehow managed to carry on the ideas and the relationships with these buildings. And you also, just randomly started an initiative that actually stands up for freelancers. So I think, it's just it's so inspiring to listen to you, Adele, and I'm really grateful for all your hard work.
Oh, it's very sweet. It's so funny, isn't it? Then you kind of, in the moment you go, what am I doing? I'm just walking around, I'm in lockdown, I'm not doing anything. And then you can look back and go, oh yeah, okay, we did some things, we got some stuff done.
Definitely have. I only have one last question for you before we say goodbye. It's something I always ask from my guests. So you mentioned it's very nice to be in an empty theatre, and I was wondering, if you were here in our auditorium and if anything were possible, what would you like to make in this space?
Ooh, that's nice. So I've become obsessed with Francesca Caccini's La Liberazione del Ruggiero, which I think is amazing. And for people who don't know it, it's commonly known as the first known opera written by a woman. She wrote it in 1625, and it was great. I mean, I explored it at first because she was a woman and because that was intriguing, but the piece is just amazing, so brilliant. And what I really love about it is that it's completely bonkers. It's gorgeous. It has amazing characters, and the music is just so, I mean, it's really old, so it's kind of contemporaneous with Monteverdi, and that really old first opera just does something to my sinews. It does something to the blood in my body. It's kind of deep and rich and woody and so strange. There's a chorus of dancing flowers, and there's a horse ballet.
And how would you do it? Do you have like an idea for it?
I do, and I don't think I should say. I don't think I should say, because there's a possibility that it might happen. But I think that the big influence for me in that piece are those kind of beautiful ceremonial films like The Colour of Pomegranates, which is an amazing Armenian film, which is, at the minute I watched it, became one of the biggest influences, or Holy Mountain by Jodorowsky, which again is, amazing. It's got that quality. It's like almost like cartoon, but incredibly artistic and beautiful.
Thank you so much, Adele, for coming on here and for talking to us. I am so excited for all the work you're about to present to us, and I really hope that we'll be able to go and watch it as well, hopefully in person.
Yes, lovely. Thank you so much, my love. What joy.
This was Traverse. Thank you so much for joining us, and join us next time to see what's next for our industry.